Hi everyone. Today is all about the short story, and I was planning to explain what it is all about in this short video. I hope it, I certainly hope it will be a short video. But yeah, uh, and it's nice to be back finally at last. I hope you all had a great time with Ida. I certainly thought she was really good. So, let's get on with it. Okay, so, the short story. This stuff. I'll be talking mainly about two things, namely what it is and how you will be making it. So, first off, to start with the what. There are two kinds of short stories. There is the tale and there is the sketch. And first off, the tale, it's very old, really old. The old stories that were told about the gods in ancient times, as well as many parts of the Bible, they are essentially short stories. And then we have the sketch. This is quite a modern one. So short story in English, it's similar but not identical. Sorry, to the novelle in your Norwegian classes. Very similar, but not the same. Novelle, it looks a lot like the sketch here. But short story refers to basically two kinds of stories. Usually, you should interpret it as a task to write a sketch, but you could also write a tale, but that would be brave. But not illegal, just brave. So, we'll start off with the tale. A tale is a manifestation of culture and tradition. So, a tale is deeply rooted in the culture of people. Usually, it's something that old people tells young people around the campfire over there, and it's quite simple. It's not. It should not be that hard to get, because the content of the story is didactic. That means that they want to learn you something in this story. So it's quite simple to get, and also important, it's told within a culture. It's not meant for foreigners. So it's meant to be told to someone that is already within your own culture. And it is as such an agent of time and tradition. That's the main purpose. And then to the sketch. The sketch is not meant to be read around the campfire. It's meant to be read on paper, and it's a quite it's a modern take on the short story, and it started up like people writing reports for newspapers actually. So because of that, it's quite photographic. So they try to explain everything as it is or could be, because this is this is fiction after all. The sketch is more analytic, so usually you will write one of these sketches to highlight maybe a problem in a society or your society, and to kind of share that with someone without your outside of your culture. So it is in that sense an agent of attention and space, and not of time and tradition. As I have written down twice here, it's analytic. It's important that you raise some questions. Do not raise your questions by simply saying, "Well, what's up with all this stuff?" Do it a bit more sudden. So it's all, and that leads me to my next point, that should be suggestive. So you should only come with suggestions as to how you should you should only come with suggestions to how you should interpret it, and that is in opposition to the one from the tale, where it should be overstated. So if you're trying to say something, just suggest it. You could also say that it's incomplete, but that would be that would be kind of harsh. Okay. So that was short about how to actually what it is, and now on with how you could write one for yourself. And first off, as you see here at the top, I have highlighted do not start with the plot. Despite what you see on many places, especially maybe in your books and on the internet, in Norway they always say start with the plot. I say that is wrong. You should not start with the plot. It's a bad idea. Yeah. So I'll now be talking about various techniques as to how to get started and how to write. And first off, we have structure, characters and setting, language, narrative form, and other stuff. If you recognize this from movie analyzing, you would certainly be right. It is a lot of the same stuff that's repeated here. So let's get on with it. Okay, first off, we have structure and composition. Structure and composition, that is the stuff that makes your story to one coherent piece. It's also a way to, or it's a very necessary way in your story to deal with time, as you can see here. So in order to tell a story, you need some concept of time. And I'll start with actually this one. And this is a really common way to do it with a novella, and that is to start the story at the end. I remember in ungdomsskolen, our teacher told us that this is the way to go if you want to write a good novella. But this is one way, one of many good ways. So here you start the story here, where this timeline, that is supposed to how the actual events unfolded, and these numbers, that is the order that we got them told to us. So as you can see, they start here and then go back to the start and explain everything. So this is quite common in a novella to use, and also in a lot of short stories. So when you get there, you only have to resolve the final conflict, or even this is the actual end, so nothing happens past point 5 there. And then we have the chronological order, and this is quite easy to get. That's the one you use all the time. If you don't think about what you are going to write, you would most likely be telling stuff in chronological order, and that means that you are telling it according to time. Chronos, that is of course Greek for time, and also like a titan, an old god. So you're just telling it in the order that it happened. So next up we have the story within a story, this one, and this is this can get really complicated really fast, really complicated really fast, and as you see here, the story starts and poop, whoosh, you're going over to another dimension, telling another story within your story. and then the story is over and you get back here and finish up. So usually the story within a story serves mostly as a metaphor for what you are going to what a story is truly about. So kind of like the movie Inception. This uses an extreme version of this. Okay, so onwards to the next one, and that is this one, starting in the middle. This is similar to the second one, this one that we already looked at, but this one is kind of different. So this is the one where you start at some point where there is something really exciting happening, and this is where you would maybe say like, you're maybe wondering how I got here. Well, let me tell you how. And then it starts, and then after you have catched up with the timeline, you continue on, and then we have the final one, and that is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing, that is also a way to structure your or compose your story, and for one example of this is this guy. We'll get back to him. He just appears right now. I have no intention as to explain what this is. Actually, I don't remember, but we'll get back to that shortly. So this way you start story, and then you get something that happens in the future. You can see it, and then you go back and you progress and you go forward again and forward again. So usually you can have a lot of foreshadowing going on at the same time, but your audience won't always catch up with it. So onwards to the characters and settings. So there are definitely some do and don'ts with the characters. You should definitely start with a limited number of characters. That is because the short story is short, so it's quite obvious that you cannot be talking about everyone in the world. Second thing is that your characters need to be credible. What I mean by that is that it's important that you actually believe that these guys exist for real, that they're not some odd figures that you think like, what is this? I would never do that. So they don't have to be logical, but they have to be reasonable, and that's an important point. And finally, there is no need to tell everything about them. You could live, or you should live, a lot to be guessed. And these are, of course, essential, with an L, not essentia, but essential for the story. Good characters are really important to get people hooked on what you are writing. Stephen King is a master of this. And this is where a lot of people start say that you should start your story. You should start by figuring out what kind of characters and what kind of setting they are in, and then you figure out what happens once you get to know your characters. And that is a good technique. It works quite great, and I would certainly recommend it. If you start with a plot, it's really easy to get uninspired and get a very dull story. So onwards with the setting. The setting is often carefully explained because the setting is the actual place where the characters are exploring. That's the world they live in. So you need to tell a bit. You need to you need to actually tell the audience about what kind of world these characters live in. And by explain carefully, you don't need to like tell it like you are a real estate real estate guy, but you need to make sure that your environment is properly described. Don't need to overdo it, but you need to be very aware of what kind of stuff you will be talking about when you are explaining the setting of this of your story. Setting is could be like where the story actually happens. So at school, at home, and then you need to remember to explain what is so important with the school, what's special about it, how does the characters feel when they are there, and stuff like that. And of course the characters, they can be all kind of people. They can be this guy, this angry woman with red hair, this bird, or this horse. It's just drawing up some characters that I thought of. So okay, language. Language is important. Language is of course well, not everything, but almost everything when you are writing, because language is the medium that you are expressing yourself with. So it's important. And there are some good stuff as well as some bad stuff, things that you should not do. So first off, you have to be original. You need to be independent and think a bit for yourself, and make a story up after that. Right. So you can't copy something, and you can't imitate too much. You need to trust your reader, and what I mean by that is that you cannot explain everything. You should not explain everything. You should probably give some details and not all of them. For instance, if I were to explain this guy over here, I wouldn't say that his jaw was V-shaped. He had rings around his eyes. He had kind of spiky hair. His mouth was very little. His neck was big. You don't go on and on and on. You give some key features. Like you say, like he was butch but had a really small mouth, for instance. That would be kind of a better explanation for him, I think. And in that sense, you could say that less is often more. But if you write extremely little, then that is, of course, not the case. So, onwards to the bad stuff. That's cliches. You won't know a cliche if you if you don't read stuff. So it's kind of like you could look them up, but if you read a lot, you will instantly recognize them. And the kind of cliches that you want to avoid are some phrases that's used all the time, and some structural cliches. You usually find this structural stuff in a lot of bad Hollywood movies. They have structural cliches, and you could give too much information. And that is, as I explained earlier, the thing with explaining your characters too much. And yeah, finally, it's of course it is a problem that you do that. It gets quite boring. So finally, you would seek to avoid using too many adverbs. Adverbs, that's the words that describe an action, and that's the particular kind of adverbs that we seek to avoid using a lot of. And that would be instead of saying he closed the door, or he slammed the door, you would say like he forcefully closed the door. Like, it's often unnecessary to use the adverb, and it looks kind of silly. If you use a lot of adverbs, you are kind of implying that you do not trust your reader. because you are overstating everything and explaining it in a ridiculous way, and you see it if you read it out loud. So do not do that. Okay, next thing, and that is the narrative angle. The narrative angle, that is where you are viewing the stuff from. This is quite straightforward. Either it's in the first person, and that is through the eyes of the main character. This is good for showing a certain perspective, of course, and it makes you have to think about what does he know, what does he not know. And second thing here is the third person. We do not tell stories in the second person for obvious reason. You can try, but it would be quite hard. And then you are kind of a fly on the wall with some telepathic powers. Usually you're able to read the mind of the main characters, but not everyone. And then finally we have the Omniscient view, and that's when you see everything down there. And this is really common in tales, but not that common in modern stories anymore. Yeah. So with the Omniscient view, you know everything that is going to happen. And then finally we have the other stuff. Usually after the first draft you could put in some symbols and some metaphors, and that would usually that would add to the story. It's a lot more fun to read a story with some metaphors, some good metaphors. And here's a point where you can certainly fall into the trap of doing some cliches. And then we have the title. You need it. You need one title. Often in a lot of school papers, the title is already given to you, but the title should, if you're making it yourself, it should involve either the theme or the irony of the story. So you could usually, if the story is all about some great irony in a certain culture, then you could name the story after that, or maybe after the theme. You usually don't know the theme of the story before you're done, so and then you could work on it to accentuate it, to make it more obvious. And that's usually the way writers actually work. First off, you start writing, and when you're done, you add stuff like symbols, metaphors, themes, and all the stuff that we have talked about today. So usually that never appears on the first draft. How do we know that? And I'm not guessing here. Well, we know that because they say so themselves. Usually writers, they also write a book about writing where they explain all their tricks, and they state how what kind of tricks they have used in their stories. A lot of the writers actually do that for not all of their stories, but most of them. So we actually know this stuff. It's not your literature teachers, they are not making it up. You could actually point to these techniques and find them quite easily, and the authors themselves have often done it. So on the vocabulary, finally, use the one you got. You don't need to take on your fancy pants and write with words that you would never use. So when you are writing, it's already too late to learn to put in new words, unless you are actually struggling with finding that exact word that you need. So finally, back to the plot. So the plot is usually the main foci of a lot of people when they are trying to retell or analyze a story. But that is not the best way to start if you want to be creative and actually want to tell a story to people. Then you should probably start. I think. Yeah, you don't have to. If you like starting with the plot, yeah, of course you may. But I like to start with the characters and setting, and see what happens. And then you usually have to imagine a bit wild characters. That's not not that boring, really. They're interesting, so then the story gets interesting. And yeah, that was basically it for me on short stories. I'll post the exercises on Teams, and of course I wish you best of luck. I'm sorry if I am sounding a bit tired. That's because I am. It's really early still, but anyways, I'll upload it on YouTube, and I would like if you actually gave me some feedback on the video. Well, what could I explain more, and what was good explained. So please send some feedback. I appreciate it a lot. Use the chat or team on Teams preferably. That's the easiest. Okay, so bye then, and good luck.